Hi there, folks. This is the practice chapter 8B test, and as always, I am the amazing Mr. Jansen. So away we go. If we take a look at this first one, it just asks us to solve this equation. So I'm going to take this off to the side, the 2x plus 4 equals a negative 8, and we're going to solve this for x. And the first thing we have to do is subtract the 4 from each side, which leaves me with a 2x equals a negative 12. Remember, negative 8 minus 4 is a negative 12. And now I just have to divide each side by 2. So I find out that x equals a negative 6, which is letter D. If I take a look at the next one, it says the ordered pair is 1, 2, 2, 8, 3, 18, and 4, 32, and 550 represent a function. What is the function rule? In other words, what's the equation that goes with this function? And keep in mind that these are x values paired up with y values. It's xy, 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 and xy, which means if I plug an x value in, I should get that y value out. So what we're going to do is we're just going to test a couple of these. I'm going to plug a 1 in and see what I get out for y. So if I plug a 1 in here, I find out that y equals 2. So that's the ordered pair 1, 2. So that one works for the first ordered pair. If I look at the next one, y equals 1 plus 2. That gives me a y equals 3, which doesn't work. I wanted a 2. If I plug it into the next one, y equals 2 times 1 squared. That's going to give me a 2 times 1, which is a 2, and that's what I was looking for, so that one works. And then the last one, y equals 2 times 1 plus 2. That gives me a 2 plus 2, which is 4, and that one doesn't work. So right away, I've eliminated 2 of these answers. I know it's not this one or this one. Since each of these, A and C, both worked, I'm just going to go ahead and plug in the next point. I'm going to plug in a 2 instead. So I'm going to plug a 2 in here. And when I plug a 2 in for x, I should end up with an 8 for y. So I'm going to see which one of these gives me the 8. So if I plug it into the first one, that gives me a 2 times 2, which is a 4. So that one doesn't work. So I've essentially narrowed it down, but let's plug it in just to make sure. Y equals 2 times 2 squared. When you do this, you want to do the exponent first. So 2 squared is a 4. Then times the 2 is an 8. So it does give me that second order pair. So now I know that the answer is letter C. Okay? This one, it says write an algebraic expression for each word phrase. The first one says 5 times the difference. So we're going to do 5 times the difference. And when it says 5 times the difference, it's implying that I want to do that difference first. And since difference means subtraction, the only way to do subtraction before multiplication is to put it in parentheses. And I want to do the difference of x and y, so I want to subtract the x and the y. So it's 5 times the quantity x minus y, which is letter A. For the next one, it says the sum of 2 times a and b. So the sum of 2 times a, well, 2 times a would be 2a. Let me write that up here. And b, and we want the sum of, so that's addition. And this time it labeled the sum of 2 times a and b means we're going to do those things separately, which means this is letter D. Okay, so the wording and the order of the wording is very important here. The next one, it says, what's the solution of the equation? So if I looked at something like this, 3/4 x minus 2 equals 6. The first thing I would do anytime I see a fraction in an equation, I'm going to multiply through by the common denominator. In this case, it's 4, so I'm going to multiply everything by 4. Whatever I do one side, I have to do the other side. And essentially what that's going to do is it's going to eliminate all of the fractions. So here I have to distribute. If I do 3/4 times 4, it just leaves me with a 3. So a 3x minus 4 times 2, which is 8, equals 6 times 4, which is 24. And now I can solve this one. I'm going to add the 8 to each side. So I get 3x equals a 32. And now I divide each side by 3. So that's going to tell me that x equals a 32 over 3. And normally I would leave this as an improper fraction. But if I look, all of my answers are mixed numbers. So I'm going to have to change this to a mixed number. 3 goes into 32 10 times with 2 left over. So it's a 10 2/3, which is letter A. For this one, it asks, what's the solution of the inequality? So I'm going to take this inequality and solve it. Again, if I want to make this really easy on myself, I can get rid of the fractions by multiplying through by the common denominator. This one, the common denominator is a little bit more difficult to identify. But for this one, the common denominator between a 4 and a 5 is a 20. So I'm going to multiply each side by 20. Whatever I do one side, I have to do the other side. Over here, I'm going to have to distribute. So that's going to give me a 20x minus 20 times 1/4 is going to give me a 5. 1/5 times 20 is going to give me a 4. And now I have a very simple inequality to solve. I'm going to add the 5 to each side. So that's going to leave me with a 20x is greater than or equal to a 9. Sorry, a 20x. Let me rewrite that. I missed my 0. And now I'm going to divide each side by the 20. So I find out here that x is greater than or equal to a 9/20. Okay, and if we look, the answer that matches that is letter A. And if we look at the graph, that looks about right. 9/20 is a little bit less than a half. I have to use a closed dot because there's an equal to condition, and I want to be greater than, so it goes to the right. So this one looks to be the answer is letter A. This one, it says match each equation with the proper name. We've got an x to the 5th, a 2x to the 3rd plus 8, and an x squared plus 3x minus 5. And really, we're talking about the degree here. The first one is a 5th degree. The next one is a 3rd degree. And the last one is a 2nd degree. And remember, when we're looking at these, the 5th degree doesn't have a special name. It's listed right here as the 5th degree, so that's letter C. The second one, a 3rd degree, we call a cubic. Okay, it's a cubic equation, just like cubing something is to the 3rd power. And then the 2nd degree is also known as a quadratic. So that's letter A. And that's it. In number 10, it says, what is the degree of the following polynomial? Remember, the degree of a polynomial is equal to the highest degree monomial term. So if I look at each of these monomials, if I look at the first one, the first term, that has a degree of 5. I just add the exponents together. The next term has a degree of 7. I add the exponents together. And the last one has a degree of 3 because there is only one exponent for my variables. And so now the degree of the polynomial is equal to the highest degree monomial term. The highest degree monomial term is the one in the middle, which is the 7. So the degree of this polynomial is also a 7. So this is a 7th degree. This one, it says to list the coefficients of the equations and the constant term. Remember, coefficients are the numbers that we list in front of the variables. And the constant terms are numbers without variables, numbers that stand alone. Okay, so for this one, the coefficients are a 4 and a -7. The 4 is the coefficient with the x. The -7 is the coefficient for y. And then the constant term is the 8. And that's it. If we take a look at the next one we're actually factoring, finally doing something that we did in this chapter. For this one, it's a trinomial, and trinomial tells me I should build a bridge. There's no greatest common factor here, so I just go right to building a bridge. That gives me a 48. And now I need two numbers that multiply to a 48, but add to the middle term, which is the 14. And those two numbers are a 6 and an 8. And then with this one, since there's a 1 in front of the t squared, I can use my shortcut. So I can go right to the two factors. It's going to be a t plus 6 and a t plus 8. Okay, using the two numbers that I came up with. And that's it. If I look at the next one, again, it's a trinomial. There's no greatest common factor to factor out, so I build a bridge. That gives me a -32. Two numbers that multiply to a -32 but add together to give me a +4 are a +8 and a -4. Since there's a 1 in front of my d squared, I can use my shortcut. So I go right to factoring this. That's going to be a d plus 8 and a d minus 4. And number 14, Really, I treat this the same way. I still build a bridge. So I do 1 times the negative 24, which is negative 24. Two numbers that multiply together to give me a negative 24, but add together to give me the negative 5 are a negative 8 and a positive 3. And then from here, if we're concerned about making a mistake trying to use our shortcut, we can do it factoring by grouping. If I split up the middle term, I do the x squared. This is going to be a minus 8xy and a plus 3xy. I use those two numbers that I came up with to rewrite the middle term. Minus the 24y squared. And now I can do my factoring by grouping. I group the first two terms together. I group the second two terms together. Out of the first two terms, I can factor out an x, which leaves me with an x minus 8y. The second two terms, I can factor out a 3y, which leaves me with an x minus 8y. And so now my two factors are the x plus 3y, the things that I factored out, and the x minus 8y, the binomial that I was left with each time. And keep in mind that we can use a shortcut here and go right to the answer. We just have to remember, instead of doing x plus 3 and an x minus 8, we have to do an x plus 3y and an x minus 8y. All right, and we can apply that same thing to the next one, and we'll do our shortcut on this next one. I build a bridge that's a positive 20. The two numbers that multiply to a positive 20 but add to a negative 9 are a negative 4 and a negative 5. And so going to my shortcut, normally this would just be an x minus 4 and an x minus 5. But since we have that extra variable of y, each of these, instead of being a 4 and a 5, it's going to be a minus 4y and a minus 5y. And that's it. Okay, so keep that in mind. We can use a shortcut on those. If you don't feel comfortable with that, just do it like we did at number 14, split up the middle term and factor by grouping. For this next one, again, I build a bridge. That gives me an 88. Two numbers that multiply to an 88 but add to a 26. Looks like it's going to be a 4 and a 22. And for this one, I can't do my shortcut because I have an 8 out front, so I'm going to split up the middle term. So I'm going to split this 26 into a 22 and a 4. So it becomes an 8x squared plus 22x plus 4x plus 11. And now I can do my factoring by grouping. I group the first two terms together, group the second two terms together. Out of the first two terms, I can factor out a 2x, which leaves me with a 4x plus 11. Out of the second two terms, there's not really anything I can factor, but I have to factor something out. So I can always factor out a 1, so I'm going to factor out a 1, which leaves me with a 4x plus 11. Remember, with factoring by grouping, you have to factor something out, and now I can see the things they have in common. So my two factors are the 2x plus 1, the pieces that I factored out, and the 4x plus 11, the piece that was left each time. Okay? And that's it. If I look at the next one, again, I build a bridge. When you build a bridge, you're only using the coefficient, so it's 12 times 5, which is a 60. And now I need two numbers that multiply together to give me a positive 60, but add together to give me a negative 11. And as I sit and think about this, I start running through my factors, 6 and 10, and 4 and 15, things like that. And I can't come up with two numbers that multiply to a positive 60, but add to a negative 11. So that means this one can't be factored. This one is prime. Okay?